imagine that you have an alien that lands on Earth. How would you communicate with it, right? It's a completely different dialect. And you don't have any clues. The same goes for whales.
One day, and I hope in my lifetime, somebody is going to discover a Roman ship with a library on board, and we might find their lost tragedies. We might find their Aristotle.
In engineering, we try to answer questions, but we don't ask the questions. Someone else is asking us the question.
One of the purposes of BTS is to bring the people who design robots and the end users together so they can communicate.
So a marine biologist would be interested in how dolphins are moving, for example, and I will develop a method to allow him to do that.
Sometimes the most valuable thing you can do for an engineer is ask them a stupid question.
Kako se probiti kroz površinu svjetskog okeana u skoro potpuno neistraženo podmorje naše planete? Kako unaprijediti podvodnu komunikaciju koja se uglavnom oslanja na akustiku? Kako stalno inovirati pomorsku robotiku koja posljednjih decenija značajno pomaže istraživačima različitih profila? Ova pitanja pokreću naučnike širom svijeta da u saradnji sa inženjerima kreiraju tehnologije za proučavanje svjetskog podmorja. Mnogi od njih godinama dolaze na konferenciju Breaking the Surface, skraćeno BTS, koja se od 2009. održava u Hrvatskoj. Prošle godine BTS je stigao u Crnu Goru, u Kumbor, zahvaljujući Univerzitetu Crne Gore, koji se kroz projekat Monusen povezao sa institucijama iz Velike Britanije, Italije i Hrvatske. Za potrebe različitih istraživanja, od pomorske arheologije do biologije mora, od otkrivanja podvodnih mina do zaštite delfina od buke koju proizvode plovila, inženjeri stalno unapređuju robote i akustičke mreže koji se međusobno sporazumijevaju zvučnim talasima. Jedan od vodećih svjetskih stručnjaka u ovoj oblasti, profesor Roy Diamant iz Izraela, posljednjih godina okrenut je bioakustici, pa širom svjetskih mora dešifruje jezik kitova i delfina.
One thing that is very much of interest to me these days is how animals, and specifically marine mammals, are actually communicating with each other. So as a target species, we have the sperm whales, and we have a huge project funded by Ted Audacious in the Dominica Island in the Caribbean. So I can go to not just Montenegro, which is a really nice place, we can also go to the Caribbean. And we record the sperm whales. We have these kind of huge infrastructures with acoustic recorders that are there all the time. And we try to detect the whales, how the whales are speaking to each other, localize them so we know their position, and eventually try to translate their language and close the loop and actually communicate with them. So this is called Project SETI. SETI from the idea of like extraterrestrial communication. So imagine that you have an alien that lands on Earth. How would you communicate with it, right? It's a completely different dialect. And you don't have any clues. The same goes for whales. We don't have any dictionary of Whalish, right? Like how do the whales actually speak to each other? So this is what we do.
What have you discovered so far?
So we actually proved that this is a language. It has a language characteristics, so very advanced machine learning tools to do that. Involves graph theory. So essentially finding that the clicks of the whales, that's how they transmit, with certain clicks, they form a structure that is very distinguished. So it forms a language. So we defined it as Whalish, that's how we call it, and this is so far. The project is already ongoing, so we have lots of data, processing, it's a pretty big group also. I think obviously the work that we are doing now with the sperm whales is very, very innovative, and this idea of developing algorithms that detect sperm whales on a massive scale, 5 years of data collection, we are gathering more than 100 terabytes per month. This is really innovative from all points of views, both operational and algorithmic-wise.
What kind of equipment do you use in this project?
We are using acoustic recorders, so we have huge buoys that below them we have optical cable and instruments strapped to the cable. The depths in the Dominican island are really great. It's 2,000 meter depths. So we have the instruments all the way down to 800 meters. And there's 28 different elements, recording elements, acoustic elements, which we call hydrophones, like hydro of phones. And they are basically recording. Everything flies up with the optical cable to the buoy, to a surface buoy, where we do actually online and in real time the detection and the localization of the whales. The understanding of things is done offline in the lab. We also have drones, aerial drones, that are putting acoustic tags on the whales themselves. So the drones are flying, putting tags on the whales, and those tags stick to the whales with a vacuum. They also record, but just on the whale itself. And then after 24 hours, they basically pop up and we collect them.
Let's say that here in the Adriatic you have been engaged with a similar project.
We try to understand how dolphins are affected by shipping activity. So ships, due to their propeller, are basically creating bubbles. And those bubbles implode at really high and create really high noise. Sometimes I can hear boats from 20 kilometers away. And that doesn't mean that they have to be really huge, ferry type or cargo type vessels. It can be also, any yacht that moves really fast. So in water, this noise, which we call underwater radiated noise, is something that really affects the environment. Actually, the International Marine Organization has set up guidelines for that, and in about 7 years, this thing will become regulated. So every person who will have a boat will have to prove that his vessel is not emitting too much signal. And one of the things that are missing now is tools how to evaluate the noise of the vessels. So what we do is we place the acoustic recorders. This is done actually a bit upper in the Adriatic, in Šibenik in Croatia, where we are forming a dictionary of vessel sound. At the same time, there are dolphins around, and we try to understand if they are actually affected by the presence of vessels. This is done by checking if their dialect, again, also dolphins are communicating with each other, if their dialect change when there is a vessel around or not.
So how will the results of this research be translated into legislation?
Like in your car, for example, every year you have to check that the air pollution is below a minimum. In about 7 years, it will become the same thing with noise for any vessel. So this is kind of the idea. There is also other types of research we are doing, and we should explore maybe also here in Montenegro, is about marine protected areas. Now, marine protected areas have proven all over the world to really become like a habitat that the environment can actually flourish in them and spill over to outside of the marine protected areas. So, for example, we attach small acoustic tags to animals to prove if there is a difference in their activity within the marine protected area and outside. In Israel, we did this kind of thing with lobsters, slipper lobsters. So we attached small tags to lobsters. The lobster become very expensive this way. And we track their activity over a year to see if there is a difference between when the lobster is within the marine protected area and outside. And we actually found a lot of differences, so proving that the marine protected area is actually working.
Istraživačima morskih dubina pomoć inženjera je nasušno potrebna. Svaka naučna misija ima različite scenarije na koje utječe mnogo faktora. Zato se za potrebe konkretnih istraživanja ponekad namjenski inoviraju pomorske tehnologije. U tom kontekstu posebno su interesantni arheolozi, kojima su za pristup podvodnim lokalitetima neophodne različite tehnološke alatke.
You often say that BTS is very special for you. What makes this conference so different?
BTS is a very wonderful venue for bringing together people from different disciplines with the engineers who are building the things that they need. And an example of that is something that I'm doing with Professor Jeff Neesham from Newcastle University. He is building for us, with a team from Newcastle, a buried object scanning sonar that we plan to use for archaeology. And it is literally an idea that started out scribbled on a napkin, just like the proverbial, crazy idea that you have while you're talking about what you need, and a few years later it's becoming a reality. So that's just one example of new technology that's come out of this conference. One of the purposes of BTS is to bring the people who design robots and the end users together so they can communicate. And archaeologists are end users of robots, and we don't understand anything about them. So it's very good training for the engineers to be able to explain what their robot does, and for us to be able to tell the engineers what we need the robot to do.
Profesorica Buxton daje pionirski doprinos pokretanju projekata pomorske arheologije u Africi, čije je podvodno kulturno nasleđe skoro potpuno neistraženo.
Well, I was very happy to be able to bring Caesar Beta here from Kenya this year, because we are working together in Tanzania. Actually, the project started looking for a lost Roman port that we think is in a group of islands there called the Mafia Archipelago. However, since we've been there, working there this summer, we realized there is so much more there that we need to explore, that we need to study. And we are actually now talking to Blueprint Subsea and hoping to get some of their technology down to Africa where we can use it. So it's very exciting to be exploring this part of Africa that nobody has really looked at the underwater cultural heritage there yet.
What kind of technology are you going to use?
For example, the Blueprint Subsea company that is based in the UK make an amazing system called the Artemis, and it's just about this big. It's a sensor package and computer and interface all in one, and it's attached to a scooter, and you can go quite fast along the sea floor, and you can get sonar data, you can get photographs, and you also know where you are. It has localization. So with that, we can make a very detailed, very fast map of the seafloor in the areas that we want to explore. We have one particular area where we have a large number of shipwrecks, so this is where we hope to be able to use this system.
You have been working all over the world for so many years. Let's mention your expedition in the Indian Ocean. Why was it so valuable, so special?
For reasons I won't go into, I have long believed that the Romans were using this southern monsoon route to cross the Indian Ocean. But the only way to prove that was to find a Roman ship in the Indian Ocean, which, as you know, is a very big place. But the thing about shipwrecks, 80% of them occur close to land. So if you have a big ocean and you want to find shipwrecks in it, all you really need to do is look around the islands and reefs. But even then, it's very, very difficult to find material that's more than 2,000 years old. So I went looking instead for the ultimate shipwreck survivors, which are rats. Rats leave the sinking ship and they go onto an island and they breed with each other, so that today when you study their DNA, you can trace back how many generations they've been breeding together. That is when the first shipwreck or ship reached that island. And that is how you know where to look for the shipwrecks. So that was a project where everything about it, the people involved, all the technology we used, everything came together at this workshop. So that's an example of an expedition that comes out of BTS, and many others could be added to that list.
So how exactly did BTS facilitate this expedition? What happened?
One of the major things that was preventing me from doing this expedition for, I was really trying for almost 10 years, is I couldn't find anybody with a suitable vessel that would be willing to sail into the middle of the Indian Ocean, but also be small enough to go into the places and reefs that I needed. So I needed to find someone with a sailboat who was a little bit crazy, willing to do this. And I met that person, Professor John Potter, here at BTS. And it literally was just talking in the bar and talking about the Indian Ocean. And he said, I've got a sailboat. I've been to the Indian Ocean. I said, I want to do this expedition. And he said, can I come? And that was where we made the deal. So if I hadn't come to BTS, we wouldn't know that Romans were sailing across the Indian Ocean by the southern monsoon route. And one day, I am quite sure we will find Roman shipwrecks in this area.
So BTS has been fruitful in so many different respects, especially when it comes to creating new technologies. How do participants who are not engineers contribute to this process?
Sometimes the most valuable thing you can do for an engineer is ask them a stupid question, because it forces them to think about the equipment and the problem in a way that they would never think about because it's a stupid question. And we as end users of their products can often push them to create things that they never dreamed would be possible if we hadn't asked for them. So sometimes understanding everything is not an advantage. It makes you less creative and you don't dream as big.
Zbog svega ovoga, BTS je konferencija na kojoj se sanjaju veliki snovi, na kojoj naučnici, inženjeri, inovatori, svako u svojoj oblasti, pomjeraju granice našeg znanja i stalno teže novim postignućima.
Some things that are really driving me is the connection with regulators. So I don't want just my work to be in certain papers, doesn't matter which journals, I actually want to make an impact. And the impact eventually is being done by regulations. So getting in touch with those regulators that eventually set our rules, influence them by data-driven science, basically, I think is something that I want to do. And I'm working towards these areas. Both in terms of marine observations that prove, for example, global warming, and with the bioacoustics, the noise itself. So I would say that if we happen to have in our lifetime politicians that are actually listening to, scientists and real kind of evidence, instead of just to whatever makes the people happy in a way, or maybe industry, or at least balance this together, this would be a great achievement to science.
I often get asked as an underwater archaeologist, what is the most exciting thing you've ever found? And it's never about what you've found. It's always about what you want to find in the future. The exciting things are always the questions you don't know the answer to, the things that you haven't found yet, the robots that have not been invented, have not been created. Those are the exciting things, not the things in the past. So I'm very excited to be working with Caesar, and I don't know what we'll find in Tanzania. We're already completely surprised by what we've found that I can't talk about yet, but it's going to be amazing.
Da se veliki istraživački snovi mogu smjelo sanjati u malim zemljama ukoliko se naučnici udruže, umreže, zajedno iznjedre inovativne ideje, pokazuje ova uspješna konferencija koja godinama privlači stručnjake ponikle u malim sistemima.
There are several things that make this workshop different. And actually it's more of a workshop than a conventional conference. And one of the things is that it's not big and corporate. It is a workshop that takes place in small countries, and many of the people who come are from small countries. I myself are from New Zealand. Montenegro is a small country. Croatia is small. Many of the Eastern European countries are small. And we don't have huge resources compared to the big countries. And so when we have to solve a problem, we have to solve it with the resources that we have. And I think that makes people from small countries very creative and resourceful. And you can see that at BTS and the technology that is evolved here. It's different. It's from people who think outside the box.
If you're coming from a small country, your resources are basically limited, and you need to excel by finding different kind of routes. So that makes you maybe have to think outside of the box. So let's say you are a scientist in the US, you get tons of money and things, so this becomes something that you're used to. Whereas in Israel, for example, we are a bit shorter on resources, so, and also in manpower, so we have to actually find ways around things. So you get used to this state of mind that you really need to invent the wheel all the time. You're looking also for, and you start looking for these kind of questions. For me, for example, when I go into a new research field, I would never go into something that someone explored before and try to improve it. I would try to look for something that no one actually did before and try to be the first. That is always my ambition.
You are an engineer, you are a scientist, but you also work at the university. What would be your vision of an ideal education?
Schools and also universities have to transform from the idea of bringing knowledge into the idea of developing tools at the students. Because knowledge students and kids can gather from, from Google or from whatnot, and ChatGPT and things like that. But how to learn by yourself, how to develop new things by yourself is something that can be taught. So I think that schools have to transform this way. And that means that instead of just sitting in a class, 30 kids with one teacher in front of them, telling from a school book exactly what it is, I am more for actual work that a student can do by himself. And I think that this thing can be also adaptable. For example, now in Israel, they started this new program that I think is really nice, that students have a choice. So when they are studying something, let's say literature, for example, they can choose. Either they're doing a project on something by themselves, and the teacher would evaluate that, and the teacher basically probes them from once in a while to see how they progress. Or they can do online learning. So there is like learning, and they kind of learn by themselves, but with online. Or they go to regular class. So there are three options, and every student chooses whatever best for him. And this can be different, like for different stuff. So I think this is a step towards that idea that I mentioned, that each student needs to learn by himself. It's not like something like a standard. Everyone has to listen to the teacher.
You've asked me for my view on education. I'm going to give you a biased view because as an archaeologist working in the oceans, I'm a little bit in the humanities, the social sciences, and the hard sciences. And what I see at the moment all over the world is all the emphasis on the hard sciences, which are incredibly important, and humanities being stripped away. People are not learning Latin and ancient Greek, and they're not able to take advantage of the several thousand years of wisdom that we have. You can have all the technology in the world, but if you don't have wisdom, ultimately it will not help you. And I think one of the major things that scientists need to address now is the environmental crisis our planet is facing. But scientists can come up with all the solutions in the world, with all the information, all the facts in the world. But if you don't have a culture of people willing to adopt those solutions and change, if you don't have cultural change, the scientific solution doesn't matter. It will never be implemented. So I think people need to stop measuring education and research by metrics, by quantifiable numbers. How much money will it make? How many papers will it publish? But by whether it actually helps solve the problem. And as you know, with a lot of environmental problems, it's not about the technology we have or don't have. It's about cultural things. It's about our behavior and our choices. So I guess if I could design the Western education system myself, I would try to bring that balance between subjects that give knowledge and skill, sciences, and subjects that give wisdom, history, literature, art, music, philosophy.
Da i istraživačima morskih dubina, koji se prije svega bave prirodnim naukama i tehnologijama, umjetnost i filozofija mogu itekako koristiti, otkrili smo u razgovoru sa profesorom Dijamantom.
You completed many successful projects in the field of underwater communication and bioacoustics. Let's mention that you also hold a master degree in philosophy. I'm curious to know how philosophy attracted the attention of an engineer.
For me, philosophy was really something that I looked, which was the farthest I can from the electrical engineering work that I was doing. And this is what I was looking for. And philosophy allows you to look at things from a perspective backwards, right? So asking the questions rather than answering, in a way. In engineering, we try to answer questions, but we don't ask the questions. Someone else is asking us the question. So a marine biologist would be interested in how dolphins are moving, for example, and I will develop a method to allow him to do that. But I'm not asking my own questions. And this is something in philosophy is exactly the opposite. So for me, it was interesting.
And what was the subject of your master thesis?
It was actually, can science be considered as art?
And what was your answer?
So philosophy, you don't answer, you just ask the question. But essentially, if I can sum it up in a nutshell, I would say that an artist is actually looking to become subjective, so that everyone who is looking at a piece of art would look at it from a different point of view, and there is no actual truth. Whereas a pure scientist, let's say physician or a mathematician, would want to formalize a formula that will give the absolute truth. So a true scientist wants to be objective.
So science is about answers, philosophy is about questions. Is there a philosophical question that you are haunted by?
Ah, wow. I think maybe something that I'm interested in is now what is the source of happiness? What makes people happy in a way? And this would be a very philosophical question, because you need to define what is happiness. And I think different people would have different answers for that. So I think the part of the way towards happiness is actually feeling content with what you do. And that means that you have to find impact and essence in your work. Only when you feel satisfied with your work, no matter how the pay is, in a way, I think you experience that kind of happiness.
We have been surprisingly discussing the human happiness today with Professor Diamond. What can we learn from the ancient philosophers about human happiness?
Actually, you said one of them yourself. You're Stoic, actually more of an Epicurean philosophical view that your happiness should not be determined by the things that are around you, but by what in the study of philosophy, ancient philosophy, we call technologies of the self. And the Greeks and Romans developed this very strong philosophical tradition of controlling your inner happiness through not letting outside things affect you. That is Epicurean and Stoic philosophy in a nutshell. we have all these great works in the Western tradition, but if you look at Aristotle, most of his works are lost. Most of ancient philosophy is lost. And you asked about great discoveries. One of the great discoveries that I think will be made in the future, we will start to rediscover those lost works of Aristotle, of Euripides, of Cicero, of the great philosophers. And the reason I think this is because we know that ships carried books. We know that ancient ships carried libraries. We also know and have seen that books can be preserved underwater. Leather, papyrus, in the right anoxic conditions, these things can be preserved. So one day, and I hope in my lifetime, somebody is going to discover a Roman ship with a library on board, and we might find their lost tragedies. We might find their Aristotle, you know, so it's an incredible thing to hope for. That, in fact, would be the greatest treasure of all, not gold and statues. I mean, you know, if you had spoken to Kobe in Israel, we find this stuff all the time in Israel. 25,000 coins on the last shipwreck that we excavated. 3,000 gold coins on the one that we worked on in 2015. It's not the gold, it's not the statues. I want to find books. And the kinds of tools we're developing through BTS, like the buried object scanning sonar, these are the tools that will help us to make those discoveries.